A few years ago, I had just moved into the house that I live in now. I moved in around September and this happened in December. We had just had a large amount of snow, so much so that my work, I'm a librarian, had been closed for the day. I spent the day laying around the house and generally not doing anything unless I had to. My basement is set up as my game or TV room, and it's where I spend most of my days off. I had the TV on, watching something and kind of just laying on the couch. Suddenly, I heard someone banging at the door loud. I could hear it all the way in the basement and above the sound of my surround system. They probably hit the door about 5 or 6 times. Now, I live in a pretty relaxed neighborhood, a super suburban area, and it's quiet as a mouse at night. I had friends dropping by occasionally to see my new house, and so I assumed it was one of them being a dummy and hitting the door as hard as they could to mess with me. Since it kind of annoyed me that they had been so obnoxious about it, I sat and watched some more TV, just to let whoever it was sit out there. And if it was my friend, they would call or text me. And if it was someone selling cookies or something, well, then they could screw off. Why someone would be selling cookies after a snowstorm when the roads were coated in ice, I didn't really think about it. Anyhow, I eventually decided to go up and see if maybe there was something left on the porch or it was a friend and they were waiting for me to open the door. I glanced out of the curtain, but I didn't see anyone, and so I opened up the door. No one was there and there was nothing on the porch. In the street, covered in snow and ice, mind you, was a black Cadillac with 4 people inside, slowly creeping up the street. One of them was just at that moment climbing in the back of the car as it creeped along. He heard my front door open and he looked back at me. He just stared at me until they had moved too far up the street for me to see. I thought it was weird, but I just locked the door and went back to my day off. Later that day, it hit the news that further up my street, about a quarter mile or so, there had been a home invasion. A woman had been asleep upstairs at her house, and the 4 people that had thought that her house was empty broke in. They eventually tied her up and robbed her house at gunpoint. She finally did untie herself and went to a neighbor, who called the police and went back over with another gun to check the place out, but they were already long gone. I'm fairly certain that these 4 people were the ones that I saw outside of my house, and if I hadn't decided to go upstairs and open the door when I did, they might have thought that my house was empty and kicked in my door instead. I can still see the guy staring me in the eyes, as if he was weighing the cost of robbing the house with me in it against looking for an easier target. I guess they found one. When I was in college, my junior year, I lived in a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom dorm. This is relevant to the story. My roommate and I had roomed together before, so we were pretty good friends. Long story short, we slowly but surely stopped being so close. So, my roommate gets this boyfriend who was like 30 and doesn't go to college at all. He spends the night or whatever, but I don't care, that's her business and our room's locked. Anywho, one night her boyfriend comes over and brings some creepy friend along with him. He was polite, but I didn't want anything to do with him. I made sure to go to bed before they did, so I wasn't stuck out in the living room with him. Because he was spending the night too, and I didn't even want him to think that there was a chance in heck that he could sleep with me. Flash forward to 2 a.m. I hear a knocking at my door. My first thought was, oh heck no, I know it's that dude. So I play dead and I don't move a muscle, hoping that he would get tired of knocking and just go away and go to bed. And the knocking got louder and louder and angrier sounding. Finally, he stopped for a second, and then I hear him turning my doorknob and pushing up against my door. Now luckily, I slept with my door pad locked. Like I said, my roommate and I were not on good terms. Once he figured out that he couldn't break down the door, he just kept knocking all night long. As I laid there in fear that at any moment the door would give. Yes, I did think that maybe he had used the restroom, but he should have asked his friend or went outside. He's a man after all. Finally, morning came and he stopped. I fell asleep for maybe like an hour or so, and then my roommate and her boyfriend come knocking. I opened the door, intending to tell them about what happened last night, but they already knew. My roommate was smiling as she apologized, as if the situation was funny. The boyfriend seemed truly sorry, but the whole situation was just strange. I still to this day think that she was setting me up to get attacked or something. I was home alone one hot summer evening. My parents were out on business and I was enjoying the time alone to do whatever I wanted. Now we lived in a 2-bedroom first-floor apartment at the time. From the front entrance was a hall that opened into the kitchen, and to the left at the far end of the kitchen was my room, and to the right of the kitchen was the living room which connected to a small den. My parents' bedroom was also connected to the living room off to the right. It was around 9 p.m. when I had just finished dinner and began my nightly routine of taking out the trash, brushing my teeth, and shutting down for the night. Before retreating to my room, I opened all the windows in the kitchen and living room so that the house would cool down over the night. The windows were all barred, so I wasn't too worried about any funny business happening. I'm a little bit of a security freak, so all the doors in the house have locks, including my bedroom and the bathroom. I shut off all the lights and went to my room to watch TV. At around midnight, I dozed off. I had a weird dream, or rather a nightmare of someone knocking on my door, with the knocking getting progressively louder. It was odd because in the dream, I was laying in my bed but couldn't move. The knocking got so blaringly loud until I couldn't stand it, and then I heard a scream and I woke up. My heart was racing and I was sweating a little bit, but no damage done. I looked around my room and glanced at my alarm, which read 4 a.m. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, I brushed the dream off and I laid back down. I closed my eyes and suddenly heard knocking on my actual bedroom door. A little delirious, I thought I had slipped back into my nightmare. My eyes shot wide open and I sat up and stared at my door, trying to listen. There were 3 slow knocks that followed. My very first thought was that my parents were back early with food or something and they wanted me to have some. My dad was notorious for knocking on my door when he got home late at night to check on me, sometimes without calling my name first. I always told him that it spooked me and he should announce himself when he knocks, but he would always forget. I got up and began walking towards the door, but something felt wrong. When my parents come home, there's usually a lot of commotion. They might be having a conversation, or I can hear their keys jingling, my mom's heels, footsteps, something. This time though, it was dead silent. I stopped halfway to the door and called out, "Who is it?" No answer. I opened my mouth to call it again, but before I could get the first word out there were several rapid knocks on the door. Very persistent knocks, as if it was an emergency, and whoever was on the other side needed to get in now. I felt a lump in my throat. My mind was racing, and the first thing I thought of was, what if it was my dad on the other side and he's in trouble? What if he's choking and he can't speak? What if he needs my help? I was frozen in place and I couldn't move. I said, "Who is it?" once more. Again, nothing. "Please say something, please tell me who it is, it's not funny," I said. A few moments of silence went by. Suddenly, it was as if someone threw their whole weight in the door. Rapid, loud bangs began attacking the door. Kicks, punches. It was as if there were 3 people on the other side trying to break the door down. It was so loud that I started crying. I found myself jumping backwards and crawling to the corner of my room. The violent banging went on for a few more moments, and then silence. I sat in the corner frozen. My hands were covering my mouth and tears were rolling down my cheeks. I thought this was the end. I was shocked that the door still stood because when I heard the first bang, I thought the frame would come crashing down, and whatever was on the other side would instantly enter and end my life. I sat there for a brief period of time that felt like an eternity. Suddenly, I heard clinking, the sound of metal brushing past each other. I knew whatever was on the other side was going through the silverware drawer. If my life didn't end already, this was my last chance because I wouldn't get another. I sprang up and climbed onto my dresser, sitting against my window. I threw open the curtain and shoved the window down and climbed out as quietly as I could. I fell to the sidewalk and ran to the police station down the road. I was hysterical and told them what had occurred. That night, my parents were called and they did an investigation of my house. The only things out of place were a cigarette butt left at the base of my bedroom door and a butter knife on the kitchen table. In the following months, we moved out of that apartment, and thankfully, I can say that was the most excitement that I had ever been through. I soon went to college, graduated, moved to a new state with my family nearby, and life is continuing on as normal. I never know if it was a prank that night or someone was actually out to get me, but luckily, I'll never find out. About 3 years ago, I lived in a little studio apartment by myself. I had lived there for 1 year in total, and the entire time that I had lived there, someone would knock at my door about once a week, sometimes a few times a week, and occasionally multiple times in the same night. This studio apartment was in an apartment building with only 6 units. There was an old lady who lived across the street from me, a young girl about the same age living above me, and an older couple living next to her. The rest of the apartments were empty during my time there. Shortly after I had moved in, I started to get knocks on the door at around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. The first time that it happened, I was awake and watching a movie. I had gotten home really late from work and I couldn't fall asleep. I heard 3 firm knocks on the door. It was late and I'm a female and I live alone, so I definitely wasn't going to answer it. It was so loud that I was even too scared to go and look through the peephole in the door. My dog started to bark, so I shushed him and made him get into bed with me. And we get under the covers and I'm absolutely petrified. He's still barking, but the knocking didn't continue. I texted my boyfriend about it, but he's asleep, so he doesn't reply until the next morning. He tells me that it was probably someone who had the wrong apartment, and that made sense. Weeks go by before anything else happens, but it definitely did happen again. This time, I'm asleep. It's late and I hear firm knocks on my door. My dog is barking, so I grab his collar and push him in his kennel, which is on the way to my front door. I go and look through the peephole, but there is no one standing in front of the door. Now I'm really freaked out now. I go look out the only window that I have in the whole apartment, which faces the parking lot. There are no extra cars, bikes, motorcycles, etc. I called my boyfriend because at this point, I was too scared to even go to sleep. He assures me that it must be someone who was looking for another apartment. I mean, what else could it be? Months and months pass and this happens all the time now. I had spoken with the landlord on many occasions and they assure me that it isn't them, and that it's not one of their maintenance men. I'd begged to get out of my lease, but I wasn't able to. My boyfriend never spent the night, he's Catholic, but about 10 months into my lease, his family has a big birthday party for his younger sister, and he agrees to spend the night at my apartment so that some family coming in from out of town can sleep in his bed. We stayed up late watching movies, and again, at around 2 or 3 in the morning, there is a heavy loud knock on my door. I look at my boyfriend in a kind of, "See, I told you" sort of way. He gets up and opens the front door quickly, maybe thinking that he can catch the person that's doing this, but no one's there. It's cold out that night and it's quiet, and we don't hear anyone walking around, nobody talking or getting into the car, nothing. And we get back into bed and fall asleep. Around 5 a.m., someone knocks on the door again. This time it's quieter. My boyfriend decides to call the police. We call, they come out, and they search around the vicinity of the place and said that they didn't see anyone hanging around. The next morning, as we're leaving, my neighbor, whose front door is directly across from mine, the old lady, is also leaving. She doesn't speak English, so I've never really talked to her, but my boyfriend asks her in Spanish if she has had anyone knock on her door. She tells him no and asks why he's asking. He tells her that for the last year almost, I've had someone knock on my door at least weekly. She tells us that she's sorry she didn't see or hear anything, but that she'd let us know if she does. A couple of weeks later, I let my landlord know that I would not be renewing my lease. My boyfriend asked if we could move into a new place together, and I happily agreed. A month later, the night before I moved, I was up late packing so that I could be early the next morning and be ready. My dog was already at the new place with my boyfriend, so I was all alone. There were 3 knocks and then it stopped. I flicked my porch light on through the peephole. Again, no one was there. I felt a little less scared knowing that I wouldn't be sleeping here again. But I never found out who was knocking at my door or why. To this day, it completely baffles me. I've thought of every possible reason and I have no idea why. For an entire year, someone would continuously knock on my door almost weekly. After I moved away, it stopped and it never happened again. For background and relevance to the story, I live on a private drive. It's not gated, with 3 houses on it. My house is number 3, the last house. At the time, my first neighbor had a stay-at-home mom, and she worked from home, so they were always at home. And my second is an elderly lady who was always at home as well. So you would have to walk up the drive and past the other 2 of my neighbors' houses to get to mine, the last one. Also, as our house is at an angle, when you stand at the front door face on to the left down the side of my house, you can see our back gate which enters into our back garden and our back door. So, growing up, I had a pretty disruptive childhood. Parents with a volatile relationship and alcoholic mother, etc., a messy divorce. This had quite an adverse effect on myself and I had depression since a young child, maybe 8 years old from what I can remember. When I was around 12, I left secondary school, and I proceeded to stay at home all day every day for the next 4 years, having little to no interaction with anyone, unless it was over the internet. My mother had no choice but to go to work and to leave me at home. Because we live on a private drive, the only people who knock on the door are the postman or a neighbor or a guest who we are expecting. One weekday, I was home alone as usual when I was maybe 13ish. It was the early afternoon. I had someone hammering on our front door so dramatically, it was like they were going to knock it down. As my bedroom window overlooks the front of the house, I peeked out of the window and saw that there was a woman standing there waiting for someone to answer. She was in her mid-30s maybe, with medium brown hair and carrying a bit of weight. Pretty ordinary looking if I'm honest. But I wasn't going to answer the door to this woman. I was a very anxious child, so I always had my wits about me. And my mom told me to never answer the door to anyone when she wasn't home. The knocking stopped, and I thanked God for that and that she had gone away. But the next thing I know, this woman had walked down the side of my house, opened our back gate, and started frantically banging on our back door, which is primarily glass, so it sounded awful to me at the time. I crept into my mom's bedroom, which overlooks my back garden, and this woman was just standing at the back door frantically hitting it. Safe to say, stranger danger. I did not answer the door to her, and the woman eventually went away. Still to this day, this sits really uncomfortably with me. I never mentioned it to my mom, and I never really thought that much about it at the time other than, well, that was odd. And I think about this at least every few months as an adult. What the heck did this woman want? And why was she in such a panic, or why was she angry? Why did she bypass both my neighbors' homes and just start banging on our front door, and then run around to the back of the house and did it on the back door? I just really didn't understand it. It was creepy for me. So, for context, I'm a 22-year-old male and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school, and I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll save those for another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and my wife. Nothing special going on for the night. Just the usual, I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kind of lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and find my passenger. He has all of his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is an '06 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. But we get all this stuff loaded up, barely, and we're on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying that his girlfriend was cheating on him, and that he had walked in on them earlier that night. Me couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease. So I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in my city, we have a street that is well known for having various different vices. Pretty much everything you can think of, along with some shady motels, the works. So we get to a motel. He asked me to wait for him to check in and to get his key. No problem, man, I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people that have tried to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But like I said, those are for another time. This motel was on that street that I had mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against the building. Now, I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm already on edge. The guy gets his key. The whole motel is on the ground level, so to help the guy out, I drive up to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload some of it. While on my second trip of getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room that I was next to, not to my passengers, and one of my ladies pounded on the door and then opened it. That's when I saw a guy raise a freaking shotgun up out of his long coat and storm into the room, and the two ladies followed his, slamming the door behind him. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for the shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice that he took the boxes out of my hands or slid a $5 bill in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could protect myself. I know the guy and both ladies saw me, and I know that they knew that I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. The no witnesses kind of thing. I got in my car and I sped away quickly. I got a block or so away before I called the police, and I gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done for the night. I got a call later that evening. The cops had investigated, They never found the gunman or the woman. They never answered the door that I saw them come out of. And the occupants of the room that they went into said that nothing had happened, and that I was full of crap. Well, I know what I saw. A little info before I start. I'm from Texas, so I don't have many shoes with tread on them. The ones I had gotten too worn and eventually torn, and I needed to buy some new ones. Also, I'm a chubby 5'4" girl, and this happened at around 8 o'clock at night. And this also happened on a very popular and busy street. I live in Chicago for school, and I needed to get some things before the polar vortex. The school that I go to is near State Street, and I decided to go to Walgreens that was near the Chicago Theater. I had to stop by Target and then go to Walgreens. As I purchased everything and made sure that I had packed in everything, I headed out to the doors. As I walked towards the exit, I noticed a tall man was headed in the same direction at the same time, so I decided to let him go first. But he just stood there staring at me. He didn't make any gestures, but I still thought, oh, maybe he wants to be nice and be a gentleman. So I went ahead first and he followed. I noticed that it had started slushing and I knew I was gonna start sliding everywhere because the boots that I had on had very thin treading on them. So I had to slow down on my walking or I'd fall right on my butt. I start walking and it's at this point that I noticed him walking the same pace as me. I thought that I was in his way, but I also thought that the sidewalk was extremely big, and he could easily walk around me. But I still stepped off to the side to see if he would go around or something, but his shadow followed right behind me. I tried walking a little bit faster, but I could already feel myself slipping and losing my balance. He ended up walking a little faster to catch up to me, and soon he was right next to me, matching my walking pace. I asked if he needed anything, but he wouldn't say anything back. When I was in front of the theater, he ended up going in front of me and just stopped me right in my tracks. I tried to go to the left of him, but steps in front of me and he cut off my path. I tried to the right and he did the same thing. I paced a little faster and he ended up just circling around me. He ends up blocking my path again and gets a cigarette, and just gets right up in my face and tried to light it, but he couldn't because of the slush and the wind. I took that chance to slide away from him, but he kept trying to cut me off while trying to light a cigarette. I made it to the CTA stop to go downstairs, but because he was super tall, he used his massive body to block the stairs in front of me. He was staring me down and I wasn't sure what to do at that point. To my luck though, an older woman was coming through and he let her through. I dashed through the small opening that he made for her and asked if I could stick with her because of my situation. She was super understanding and said of course. I wanted to tell CTA personnel, but of course, there was no one in the booth. We took out our cards at the same time and went through the turnstiles at the same time. He saw that I had partnered up with her and tried to dash to us, but he must have run out of money or something because he didn't go through until a few minutes later. My new friend and I started to make small talk to calm me down a little, and asked what train I was going on and what my stop was. To our surprise, we were headed the same direction with the exact same stop. He followed us down and was still smoking a cig, but that's when the CTA noticed and was walking towards him. He turned around so that he could smoke his cigarette fast, which meant that he had looked away from us. At that point, my train arrived and we both got on. He saw us and tried to catch up to us, but he missed it by a few seconds. We both thought that was a close call. We continued to talk even after we got off our stop, and to my surprise, she basically dropped me off at home because she lived only a block further up ahead of me. In 2019, I moved to a post-Soviet country for work. And there's this American diner that I always go to on Saturdays for lunch. It's a one-of-a-kind place in the city, owned by this half-Cuban dude who loves the US. Not surprisingly, this place attracts lots of American expats who want to feel home. It takes me around 25 minutes to get there walking from my apartment, but as it gets extremely cold during the winter months, I always take a taxi that drops me off next to a big mall, on the opposite side of the narrow street where the diner is. It's hard to describe it, but the best way to reach the restaurant's entrance is by crossing the fenced garden of an old wooden church. It's an Orthodox church from the 19th century, turned into a museum, and it's surrounded by massive office buildings. The garden is small, so you can cross it in 3 minutes, and the exit gate faces the restaurant. During the winter, snow covers it completely. So, it was a Saturday morning, in January if I recall correctly, and the snow was fresh on the floor. I was walking to the diner when I noticed unusual footprints in the snow, as if someone had been walking in circles back and forth for a long period. But there was nobody around and all of the office buildings seemed to be closed. I keep walking. All of a sudden, a man that was hiding behind the church reveals himself. He doesn't look hostile, but there's something extremely odd about him. He's wearing baggy jeans, a dirty hoodie, and a blue cap. It was extremely cold and his outfit was not the best for the weather. He approaches me smiling. He starts walking to my side. "Hey there." He spoke in English too. "Hey, where are you from? Don't be afraid. I like foreigners." The vast majority of the population there looks East Asian, so it's easy to tell that I wasn't local. And his English is surprisingly good. I keep walking on in silence. "No, you don't need to be afraid, my friend. I'm part of the couch surfing community. I'm a nice guy. Look." He tries to show me something on his phone, maybe his couch surfing profile page. "Would you stay at my place?" he says. No dude, thank you," I say. And then he goes, "Well, okay, but would you give me some money to buy us both coffee? You don't have to come with me." At that moment, I was already in front of the restaurant and casually opened the doors to enter. He didn't follow me. 2 weeks later, same Saturday routine, lunch at the diner and then back home. On my way, I decided to grab a coffee at a nearby place. As I'm walking to the shop, I feel someone following me. It's him, again, and he's wearing these same clothes. We make eye contact and he starts laughing, and then proceeds to do an extremely creepy thing. He hides behind a bus stop that has glass panels on the sides and keeps staring at me. I could still see him, but he was being a complete creep on purpose. I enter the coffee shop and tell the barista, "Hey, there's a guy following me." The girl looks at me worried and says something to the security guard. It's common to see guards in the shops around here. The guy enters the shop. The moment the door closes behind him, the barista looks at the guard who immediately removes him from the place. They were so fast it almost seemed as if they knew him. Thankfully, I never saw him again after that. A few years ago, my parents and I moved out to the Maritimes. My parents were retiring and I was done with high school. Our house is situated at the very center of, and I mean this literally, a village. There are 20 people in this place at the most, and the house is 300 feet from the road, and has a forest surrounding it, except the front, which are fields that border the driveway. Anyways, the year we moved, I ended up moving away to Ottawa for school. That same year, I went back home for Christmas between semesters. Now, I'm your typical night owl, and my parents hate it. They were bugging me about sleeping in so much because they hadn't seen me in months and I was sleeping away all of our time together. That night, I stayed up until sunrise, hoping to fix my sleep cycle. It was about 5:45 in the morning when my dog woke up and came into my room. She rested her head on my lap and I knew she wanted out. I went downstairs and made myself a cup of tea and then put a coat on. For whatever reason, the winter, it didn't snow that much. And this particular day, it had snowed around 2 a.m. I remember because when I went to the bathroom, I got excited when I saw it falling. Anyways, I put on my coat and headed out with my dog. Usually, she bolts out of the door, she's freaking insane, and does laps around the house at a full gallop. But this day she didn't. Instead, she put her nose to the ground and trotted slowly around the house. I thought that it was weird, so I followed her. And that's when I noticed the footsteps. My parents' property had 3 buildings on it, a 2-door garage, a workshop, and the house itself. The driveway runs from the road in sort of pools connecting all 3 buildings. The buildings make an L shape. The snow that had fallen was only 2 centimeters or so, and so I noticed running from the forest at the bottom right point of the L behind the house a set of prints. I was extremely curious, so I followed them. They literally came out of the forest and ran around behind my house where they had stopped at a window. I lined my feet up and found myself looking in the window. And then the prints turned 90 degrees and vanished into the forest. That's when I realized the snow had fallen around 2 a.m., so whoever had left these prints must have come after that, or they wouldn't have left any prints, obviously. And well, I assume most of the world is dark between 2 and 5:45, so either this guy was wandering the woods at night, or they had wandered up when the sun came up. So I shouted for my dog and we hustled inside. I told my dad and he told me that he had left the prints, which is BS, because I was up all night and I heard him snoring. Thanks for trying to calm my nerves anyway though. So, I had just moved to New York back in July from Mississippi, and hadn't had any problems living there until this January. So, I go to a high school that's maybe 10 minutes away driving from my house, and I take the bus every day to and from school. Now usually my mom will pick me up from my bus stop and take me home, and I usually only have to wait like a minute or 2. This day, I was waiting for like 10 minutes and I called her a couple of times and she didn't answer. So I assumed that she had fallen asleep like she does sometimes, so I decided to walk home. I usually go in a straight line for about 3 streets and then make a right and walk straight down from there. On this day, I was wearing a tank top with a jacket on, Batman pajama pants and old school style Vans. The perfect outfit for walking in the snow, right? Anyways, as I'm walking straight down, I see a man who is out in front of me and walking the same way as me, so I take that right turn early, as I can just walk that way, but it just involves a couple of more turns, because I prefer to be cautious when dealing with other people on the street, especially if I'm all alone. So, as I'm walking down and starting to make the right turn, I see that the man is now walking the opposite way that he was before, and he's now walking towards me, which immediately sets off some big red flags in my head. This guy is probably about 5'11" or 6 feet tall, just wearing a black beanie, a tan jacket, and blue jeans. And I'm a very small girl, only about 5'2", so I knew that if he wanted me, he definitely had a high chance of getting exactly what he wanted. So, I naturally start walking faster, picking up my pace, than I was previously, and turn as he's probably 10 yards away from me at this point. And I'm walking really fast, straight down now. I've been walking for about 5 minutes, turning around to check and see if he had made the turn after me, and I didn't see him until the last time that I had turned around. He made the turn and he was walking straight for me. So at this point, I start speed walking, while I'm also on the verge of a panic attack. And all the adrenaline is kicked in, and then so does he. I stay at the same speed for a couple of minutes so I don't tip him off, and let him know that I can see that he's following me. After that couple of minutes, I see my house, and after seeing it, I just book it from there, But before I do turn around one last time and see that he's still sprinting after me. I finally make it into my house and just start crying as soon as I get inside the door, locking it. Luckily after that, the guy didn't continue to pursue. But still, the entire event has been stuck in my mind forever. Me and my mother were driving through our small town in South West Virginia. My mother and father are divorced and he lived in Tennessee, which is relevant to a story that I've talked about before, not necessarily this one. Anyways, they had very different viewpoints on helping out hitchhikers, as my dad was very much into hiking, camping, etc. But there was a woman walking down the road, mind you, and it's very hot outside. It's summertime and I noticed that she was carrying a child swaddled up in a blanket. This struck me as a poor choice considering it was the middle of summer and just seemed too warm for a swaddle. So I said to my mom, "We really need to pick up that woman, surely she isn't far from where she needs to go, but she has a baby." And to my surprise, my mom pulls into the gas station parking lot, tells me to go in and get a large bottle of water, and we'll ask her if she would like a ride. So we pull out of the gas station and approach the thin, almost sickly looking woman, and she very quietly just grabbed the door handle and got inside. Not saying anything at all, not even a thank you, which really didn't sit right with me, because this is the South. Everyone is friendly and approachable, for the most part. So we ask where she needs to go, and me being in the passenger seat, I turn to look at her, and she's looking down at her baby and cooing at it. She replies without ever looking up from the swaddled being. About 2 miles past the Dollar General on Jeb Stewart, and we were very close to that area. I decided to turn and speak to the woman and maybe get a conversation going. But as I get a better look at her baby, it actually was a drywall hammer wrapped up in a blanket, inside of another blanket. I froze. It was like I had walked into a deep freezer. I told my mom that I really think we should stop because I heard what sounds like a knocking and I was very adamant. We needed to stop at the up-and-coming Dollar General. As we pull in, I told my mom to get out of the car and that I needed her help locating the noise. And we met each other at the hood of the car where I told her, "Mom, that's not a baby. She has a hammer in that blanket." To which my mother advised me that we should walk inside to see if they had anything to help close that up. And we told the woman that we would be right back. And we walked inside and told them to call the police so that they could help this woman and that we could no longer have her in our vehicle. And we explained why. My mom gave her some vague reason as to why we couldn't take her further, and she got out of the vehicle very angrily but almost confused, and we left her in the parking lot. She very well could have been a really confused woman, maybe with some mental issues. I don't know what was going on with her, but I do know that I don't think she had good intentions for us. Years ago, I was working at a craft store and had recently discovered that I was pregnant. The father and I were best friends with the occasional benefits. I had been told months prior to this that I couldn't have any children, so I wasn't exactly careful. At this point, we were just trying to figure out our plan for parenting and work out our real feelings for each other. One night, I was cleaning up an aisle, finishing up my closing duties when a man walked up to me. He was a black male, short but hefty, with beads braided into his beard. I smiled at him and he approached me and asked if he needed any help. "Yeah, I'm looking for... I'm sorry. You're gorgeous." I smiled politely and thanked him, and asked again what he was looking for. "I don't even remember now. You think that I could get your number?" I'm flattered, but I'm not available and I'm also pregnant. Is the dad in the picture? Feeling rejected from a convo with the dad, I had a foot in my mouth moment. Not really. Girl, you shouldn't be doing this alone. I'll be the stepdad. Heck, I'll even be the dad. Please, let me get your number. Wanting him to go away, I gave him a fake number. I wrongly assumed that he would run when he found out that I was with a child. I also wrongly assumed that he would get the hint when he tried to call, and it wasn't me. He knew my first name because of the name tag. I never did find out his. Everyone called him the Movie Man, because he would sell bootleg movies outside of a gas station. I had put him out of my mind until the following week. I came back in after a day off. He had been back in asking for me. I told my manager about the encounter. We decided that since I worked in a department in the back of the store, when they saw him come in, they would page a code name to go to the stockroom. The next couple of weeks, Abby was called to the stockroom at least 8 times. A week went by without incident. We all figured that he had given up and we let our guard down. One day, I was walking up to the registers when he walked in the door. It was close to Christmas and we were extremely busy. I changed directions quickly, pretended that I didn't see him, and he headed straight for one of the few male coworkers. The movie man caught up with me and grabbed my arm as I reached the male coworker. Hey, I've been trying to call you and you gave me a fake number. His grip getting tighter on my arm. I looked at the male coworker and he was obliviously opening boxes to stock merchandise. No, I didn't. The number you gave me is disconnected. Look, I am now with the baby's dad. I'm not interested. What? I'm not available. Maybe not now, but I'll wait. He angrily let go of my arm and walked out of the store. That was him. I walked over here for help, and thanks for that, I said sarcastically to my coworker. Because I'm mixed and the movie man is black, the coworker assumed that we knew each other and wasn't paying attention. The manager on duty had to call the police. Getting yelled at by an officer for even giving him a fake number is fun when you're a hormonal pregnant mess. Getting yelled at by the manager for being stupid is fun. She got a stern lecture from both the officer and the head manager for not reporting it when he was coming in multiple times a week. It's been 8 years, and other than a few Abby did the stockroom pages after the last encounter, I have not seen or heard from him since then. I'm also a lot less polite when it comes to situations like this. My mom recently told me the story of how an older couple wanted to have me. My parents and I used to go to an old, fancy restaurant by the docks, and while it's still there to this day, we haven't had the chance to go back. I've been going to the same restaurant for as long as I can remember, and I love the food, and preferably the filet mignon. I don't remember this encounter, and maybe that's a good thing. It's 2003 and my parents decided to take me to the restaurant for the first time and have a nice evening meal. My dad ordered as usual, my mom ordered the filet, and she ordered me something off the kids' menu. I ended up eating my mom's filet because of how much I liked it, but my mother's a sweet woman, so she didn't mind. Just as we were finishing our meal, an older woman waltzed up to the table and said, "You know, when I saw you two walk in with your baby, I thought, oh no, it's gonna ruin my dinner. But your baby is so well behaved and pretty too. I would like to have your baby." My mom laughed it off as a joke and thanked the woman for her kind compliment. The woman walked back to her table and sat down next to an older man, probably her husband. My mom said that whenever she looked at the couple, they would have their eyes locked onto me. She did her best to try to ignore it. As we were about to leave, the woman walked back to the table and said, I would really like to have your baby." My mom got really creeped out and tried her best to keep her composure. "Oh, she's not for sale," the woman just said. "But she's so pretty. I would like to have her." My mom told the crazy lady that she couldn't take me away from her parents. The woman scoffed and walked toward the exit, with her husband or whoever he was, standing next to the door eyeing us down. My dad didn't do anything for some reason, probably because he knows that he's big enough to do some damage if the woman tried anything. I'm glad that I don't really remember this, but the crazy lady wanted to keep me for herself. Rewind to my year in 4th or 5th grade, and I'm turning 19 soon now. My grandmother from Alaska had drove her motorhome down. I'm in Florida, and she had brought her beagle, Ginger. My friends and they were my siblings lived about a 10 to 15 minute walk away from my house, and I wanted to show them my grandma's dog since I was already taking her out for a walk. I had gotten about 5 minutes from my house, so literally just down the road a little bit, and I crossed the main drag. A little bit further down is a church. My house at the time and the church's property were bordering each other. I'm on the opposite side of the road where the church is located, and there's a small circle driveway. So Ginger stopped to smell some bushes, and I'm just like, "Okay, get a smell and we can go." But then a guy in a white truck with a small trailer pulls in and parks there, and I don't really think anything of it. He gets out of the car and leaves the door open. I look over, and there's a girl maybe 7 or 8 in the passenger seat. Her knees are against her chest and she looks scared. The guy hollers at me from across the street, so naturally I look over. He says, "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you," over and over again, and then he starts crossing the road. I'm starting to freak out, and I start pulling Ginger's leash, but she is way into this bush and won't budge. He gets halfway across and there are no cars, and he asks me the most bizarre thing that I've ever heard. "Do you know anybody that's selling babies?" I look to the side, really anxiously trying to think of some kind of lie to get him to go down the street, or something just to get him away from me. I ended up saying, "No, sorry." And Ginger finally was done, so I started to book it back home. He left and said nothing else and drove away. I totally forgot about the girl in the truck. I'm walking across the street back home, and some guy in a bug exterminator truck tells me that he saw what happened and asked me if I was okay. I just say yes, still being creeped out about talking to literally anybody else, and now a second guy shows up. He left shortly after, and I walked into my house and told my mom and grandmother. They were horrified that it had happened so close and they had no idea. My mom called the police and they took a description from me via the phone, but it was really bad because all I knew was that he was a little bit taller than me at the time, maybe 30, and he had a white truck and a trailer. I remember my stepdad pulling up people who got arrested recently and asked me if I had recognized any of them. Of course I didn't though. Years later, and I really hope that girl is doing fine, and I just hope that was his daughter being really creeped out by him. Also, I hope no other kids got to talk to him. It was a really nerve-wracking experience. For background, my family moved to the countryside from the city when I was about 7 years old, and I'm 21 now. Both my parents had grown up in the suburbs and had lived in the capital of our state for about 10 years before we had moved. It definitely took us some time to get used to the train tracks that ran by our house, the wild animals, the weird but kind neighbors, and the odd visitors. Another thing is that you have to get off the main road and turn onto a long gravel drive to get up to our house. We can see the entire length of the driveway from certain points in our yard, which is about 3 acres. A few years after we had moved in, my dad got a promotion at work, and as a result, started to go to conferences and business trips that lasted from a few days to a week, at least a couple of times a year. My mom felt nervous about being home alone with two young kids. I was 10 and my brother was 6, and so we decided to get a dog. We knew that we wanted a big dog, but something that would be gentle with my brother and I. After a few weeks looking at shelters, we took home Rocky. He was about 9 months when we took him home, and dirty pushing 70 pounds. We believed that he was a German Shepherd mix with some northern or mountain breed. We aren't sure to this day, but he's a massive red-colored dog with a long black muzzle and ears, a fluffy tail that he carries over his back, and a white stripe up his nose. It wasn't long until he was 100 pounds, and an absolute force to be reckoned with. Even though he was very gentle with both my sister and I, loved our cats and was a big ball of joy around everyone we brought into our house, he tended to be very territorial and aggressive with other dogs, and very protective of us, especially of my mom and I. Once the electric company came to do work on the telephone poles on our property without telling us at first, and after 20 minutes they finally had to call us because Rocky had trapped them in their truck and was jumping up and barking at their windows. I doubt he would have really attacked them if they had gotten out of their trucks, but it was more than enough to make them think twice. This protective instinct came in very, very handy one day. It was summertime and my dad was at work and my mom was home with my brother and I, since she was a teacher and off for the summer with us. My mom was working in our garden, and my brother and I were playing close by, with Rocky watching over all of us. Rocky all of a sudden sounded the alarm, throwing his head up in the air and barking and howling. He makes a deep woo-woo noise. I looked up to see a dirty white pickup truck pull off from the main road and into our driveway. This wasn't necessarily alarming at first, as people sometimes used our driveway to turn around when they got lost. But the white pickup slowly ambled up our drive, and I could see something strange in the bed. It was lumpy and discolored, but I couldn't really tell what it was until he pulled all the way up to our house, where our other cars were, and honked the horn to get our attention. It was meat. Giant red chunks of meat with some of the limbs of various animals still attached. It was the creepiest thing that I had ever seen in my life. Just a grizzled, scraggly man in his early 50s, driving a pickup truck full of meat in the southern July heat. I immediately just got a really bad vibe from this guy, and I remember my mom telling my brother and I to go inside, and we did, but we watched out the glass door. Rocky had surprisingly been quiet at that point, but was now next to my mom, and she had her hand around his collar. The guy rolled down his window and asked my mom if she wanted to purchase some meat. My mom said no and to please leave our property. Instead, he went on about the different types of meat, and asking how much we wanted. Beef, venison, pork, etc. My mom asked him to leave again, but instead he decided to get out of the nasty white pickup. As soon as his feet were on the ground, Rocky went ballistic, barking and snarling. This finally made the guy stop. He looked at Rocky, looked at my mom, and then asked, "Does your dog bite?" And my mom, deathly serious, replied, "Only if I tell him to." The guy took one more look at Rocky and I'm guessing decided not to mess with the giant, snarling beast. He got back in his truck, backed up, and headed back down our driveway. I don't know if he really was selling the meat or not, but apparently, he had been around to our neighbors as well, who had also gotten a really bad vibe from him. We'll never know what he was really up to with those giant slabs of meat in the bed of his pickup truck. Maybe he was just a weird guy trying to sell some sketchy meat. Maybe he was looking for something else. We never saw the meat man, as we started to call him, again though. To this day, Rocky is still kicking it, by the way. He's almost 15 and now he's completely deaf. But he's still out in the yard on summer days, watching over us. This happened to my very close family friends on Christmas Day a few years ago. I used to babysit for this family around age 12, and I later house and dog sat for them for months at a time, all throughout my 20s. This story is creepy for me because I've spent a ton of time alone at their house. So, this family is enjoying a stereotypical Christmas Day evening in the family home. It's winter and so it's dark very early. It's a drizzly, wet, foggy night outside. It's a large family and all the kids are all grown in their 20s and 30s, most with jobs and out of state. But everyone has come home to be together for the holidays. The siblings are all playing with their presents and the TVs are all on. Christmas music is playing, food is being cooked and eaten, and there's a lot of laughing and talking. This goes on for many hours. The youngest daughter spots her dad standing in the middle of the courtyard outside in a black hooded sweatshirt. The hood is over his head so just his mouth and chin are visible, and he's looking in at the house. She casually calls over to her mom, who's in the kitchen, to go and check on dad because it seems like he needs help with something in the yard. Except mom says that dad is in the bedroom taking a nap. Mom and the sister quickly come to the realization that there is a creepy total stranger in a black hoodie just staring in at them, not moving, on Christmas Day evening. As you can imagine, the family collectively craps enough bricks to build another chimney for Santa. They proceed to alert everyone in the house, running around checking the locks on the many sliding glass doors and windows, and they wake up Dad. In the meantime, the black hoodie creep can see everyone's movements because the house is pretty much completely glass window walls. This guy continues to just stand there in an intentionally creepy and Jason-like pose, not moving, except now he has a sinister smile on his face. It's obvious that he's enjoying being caught. At first, the family thinks it might be a practical joke. The family members start calling out things to intimidate him like, "If this is a joke, it's not funny. We already called the cops," or "We have a gun." But the guy just keeps standing there, smiling and not moving for a long time. And then suddenly, he rushes up to the glass and starts pounding on it, not saying a word, his face still obscured by the hood. Obviously, he's intentionally trying to scare everyone, if not break into the house. And now the family really does call the police. After pounding on the glass for a good while, he runs and hops the fence near the home's trash cans and heads to the neighbor's yard. The neighbors are also good friends, so the family calls to let them know what is happening, but they never see the black hoodie man. The cops arrive within minutes, take the statements, and check all of the neighboring houses, but they never find this guy. Not long after, the family had their courtyard area completely remodeled, including a new security and lighting system. The scariest bit of this story for me is that they had no idea how long this guy was just standing there, watching them enjoy their Christmas. Some bonus information to lay things out. The home where this took place is in a quiet upper-class neighborhood. It's a square home with an interior square courtyard situated on the edge of a steep hill, with a busy 6-lane road below. It would be very difficult to climb this hill and scale the back wall to access the back porch area, and even harder to escape down without falling into the traffic below. It would also be hard to exit the neighborhood, unless climbing through people's yards, without being spotted by the police. The home is angled in such a way that the wind blows right through it, causing creaks and drafty sounds on even mildly windy days. A rustle or a crunch sound would most likely be ignored. The home's layout is similar to many traditional Japanese homes, with sliding doors attached to each section of the house, leading to the square middle courtyard. Except rather than wooden panels or screens, this home is all sliding glass window hallways. If someone is in the central courtyard at night, it is very easy to see into all the areas of the house without being seen, due to the reflection of the lights inside. However, the courtyard does have some dull footway lighting. The home is beautiful, but they have some creepy artwork, including stone statues of children playing in the courtyard, and a collection of cringe clown art that was so popular in the 80s. Also, their old dog used to growl intently at empty hallways in the middle of the night. It probably was just blind or deaf, but it's still freaky. I was often unnerved while house sitting for them, even before this all happened. And the home has a floor-to-roof iron front gate. It's impossible to climb over, and a wooden gate which is possible to climb, leading to the trash can storage area, adjacent to the neighbor's wooden fence. These are the only access points to the central courtyard. My conclusion for all of this is this guy was a crazy ex or old school friend playing a prank on one of his now adult kids. But years had passed and it was never revealed, so this seems unlikely. Or this guy had some mental problems and was possibly a peeping Tom type, and was just having an episode. Or another, this was a Home Alone type situation, where some guy was squatting in nice homes, counting on the fact that people wouldn't be home for the holidays, and possibly decided to have some fun with his family once he was spotted. I seriously doubt this single guy was planning to actually take on a family of 6+ adults. I have not stayed alone in the house since then, as the dog I used to watch passed away some time ago. I would love to hear all of your thoughts or reactions on this. So, this just happened an hour or two ago and I'm pretty freaked out. This is my first time posting, so I'll try my best. I'm sure you all know the drill. I'm a 24-year-old female. So, I have a Wi-Fi enabled baby monitor in my bedroom, so we can watch my 5-month-old son when he's sleeping in his bassinet when my husband and I are downstairs. I tend to be nude when in my bedroom in the second story of my house, and I don't have central air and it's summer in Wisconsin, and today it was currently over 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I was laying in bed, drinking a beer and watching TV, when I noticed the light blinking on the baby monitor, which was currently facing toward the bed, as my son had been in a co-sleeper in the bed with my husband last night. I work overnight shifts at the hospital. For our monitor, a light blinking on it means that someone is watching via the website or the app for the monitor. I jokingly sent a text calling my husband a creeper and was flipping off the camera and talking to it, but found it odd that it took him several minutes to read my message. He was at work at this time. When he finally responded, I could feel that my blood ran cold, but that would be embellishing. He said that he hadn't opened the app for the camera in weeks, and definitely wasn't the one watching, and advised that I unplugged the camera, which I did. I don't know who was watching me, or how they could have gotten a hold of the login info for the monitor, but whoever it was, I hope it never happens again. Hey everyone, I'm really writing this out as a way to vent because I'm in a situation where I feel really stuck. Any advice is appreciated, but I'm not sure there's anything that can be said that will actually help. I've tried just about everything. I'm going to start from the beginning. This is a story about 2 years in the making, so I'll try to be as thorough as possible. In 2019, I graduated with my master's degree and moved to a relatively rural area for my PhD. Thinking that we had made an investment, my dad and I purchased a house. The intent was to rent it out once I had completed my PhD. The house was only about a block away from a dive bar where my dad was able to make some pretty good friends. He introduced me to everyone, and everyone let me know that I would be so happy to be in my new house. because my next door neighbor was the absolute nicest guy that you could ever meet. So we met the neighbor and he did seem nice enough. He suggested that we exchange numbers just in case I ever needed anything, and I thought that was a good idea. What's the worst that could happen? A few days later, my dad left to go back to his home in another state, and I was left to my own devices. Literally the day that he left, it started. My neighbor texted me while I was away and let me know that he had left a gift for me on my front porch. In his text, he started using pet names like Sweetie and Cutie. I went home and he had left a hand-painted feeding dish for my cats in my mailbox. At this point, I wasn't that alarmed. He was just being nice, I thought. The next day, he sent me more texts with pet names and I took the opportunity to make sure. He knew that I wasn't interested in anything romantic. He replied back with a rambling text about how all the person ever needs is friends and he would like to be friends with me. After that, he would send me text messages frequently. Everything from inviting me fishing to telling me that he left more gifts on my porch. I would often not reply or just tell him that I was busy. I didn't want to be rude, but I also had no interest in any sort of relationship with him other than neighbors. One night, I got a text from the manager of the bar down the street, letting me know if my neighbor knocked on my door, I shouldn't answer. She then told me that my neighbor had walked down to the bar with a hatchet and told the bartender that he was hearing voices that got louder as he got closer to the bar. He threatened to kill someone with the hatchet if the voices didn't stop. They called the police and the police took the hatchet from him, but they made no arrest. The manager of the bar picked me up and I spent the night at her house. She told me that the police said my neighbor was on meth. After that, I tried to keep my distance even more, but things got even weirder. One day, I went out to my car to find a dead squirrel in my driveway. The squirrel had been very clearly run over and moved to right in front of the driver's side door. I just stepped over it, got in my car and left. When I returned home, the squirrel was gone. Shortly after, I received a text from my neighbor that said, "Someone or something put a dead squirrel in your driveway. Don't worry, I moved it for you." I felt like this was a weird way to word this, and I had suspected he was the one who had put the squirrel in the driveway in the first place. Another time, I walked out of my house to see that he had placed an unspent shotgun shell on the bricks in his front yard. He came out and told me that it was to serve as a warning for anyone walking between our houses. For the next couple of months, I did my best to avoid him. He would text me, inviting me over, and I would come up with an excuse or just ignore him completely. I wanted to remain cordial since he was my neighbor, but it was getting very annoying and I was uncomfortable. He would text me as soon as I got home, telling me that he was watching me come and go from my house. Around Halloween, he handcrafted a large casket and wrote, "Here lies the last son of a gun who played mind games, November 2012. What the heck? All this time still sending me messages. Eventually I got fed up and stopped responding completely. Less than 2 weeks after I had stopped responding, he threw a 50-pound flower pot at my front door. You know, those big concrete planters, yeah, one of those. I called the police who advised me to get a stalking no-contact order. A few days later, I was watching TV when a notification popped up that my neighbor was trying to cast a video to my screen. I declined it twice, and I filed another report with the police. During this time, I started the process of getting a stalking no-contact order. I saw 3 different victim advocates who all told me different things. I went out of town for a conference, and during that time, someone had attempted to break into my home. I had an ADT security system, so while they didn't succeed, I was aware of the attempt. After the conference, I came home to the entire world shutting down because of the virus. I was trapped in my home 24/7, with my stalker neighbor right next door. Luckily, court proceedings for protection orders didn't stop. Right before court, he sent me a text telling me that he was sorry for what he had done, that he could tell when he saw me outside that he made me uncomfortable. Then he went on to tell me that he could tell my hair has gotten longer and that I look beautiful. I went to court and provided all of the evidence that I had, the timeline of everything that had ever happened, the text that he had been sending me asking if I wanted a massage, the text that I sent him telling him the way he was speaking to me was inappropriate, the text saying that he knew he made me uncomfortable. I told the judge that I suspected he had attempted to break into my house while I was out of town. And the kicker is, he didn't deny any of it. Actually, he told the judge that he took full accountability for everything. He said that he was in recovery and was trying to turn over a new leaf. He didn't oppose the protection order at all. So in March 2020, I actually received the stalking no contact order. Everything was pretty quiet for a while. I mean, he did some weird stuff, but that's because he's a weird dude. It wasn't anything that made me fear for my safety though. That is until he got back up on the drugs again. At this time, we had found an unspent shotgun casing in my flower bed. It was consistent with the one that he had previously used to send a warning. This occurred a couple of months after I started dating my boyfriend, and I suspect it was a warning to him. After this, and for a variety of reasons, my boyfriend moved in with me. And he moved in pretty quickly, but everything turned out fine. We're still together and as happy in our relationship as we can be. New Year's 2021. I was awoken to yelling. I had turned on my security cameras and got footage of him sticking his head out of his window and screaming obscenities at my bedroom window for about 7 minutes. It doesn't sound like a long time, but when your stalker is screaming threats and obscenities for 7 minutes, it seems like a long time. He called me a harlot and he said, "Happy effing New Year." He said that he was going to blow up his house with his gas line. I called the police, who did respond. They told me that he never said my name, so they can't prove it was a violation of the protection order. The officer said, and I quote, "There is nothing illegal about yelling in your own house." They left without even speaking to him. All I could do at this point was do my best to avoid him. I parked on the street because my driveway is pretty close to his front porch. I got used to living with my curtains drawn. I always made sure that my cameras were charged, all 5 of them. Yeah, because of him, I spent over $1,000 on cameras. Every inch of my yard is covered. Since then, he's been seen by me and my other neighbors talking to people who aren't there, going outside and screaming nonsense. Things like, "I have Cheerios on my necklace." I'm not even joking. This basically brings me up to last week. In the morning, I was getting ready for the day when I heard screaming again. "Someone's going to die over this sweatshirt." I turned on the cameras. I got footage of him walking around the alley behind my house screaming, "Are you proud? How about I get my shotgun? I'll get everybody all fired up." I called the police. Once again, they didn't charge him with a violation of the protection order. Instead, they gave him an ordinance violation for disturbing the peace. The police told me that it seems like he was off his medication again, and that was that, and they left. Last night, I was awoken to hammering outside my window at 1 a.m. He was cutting down his privacy fence, horizontally. I called the police for a noise complaint and they just told him to stop, and that was that. As I write this, he is outside continuing to horizontally cut down his privacy fence. That means that the privacy fence only stands about 3 feet tall now. This was the one thing that made me feel relatively safe about hanging out in my backyard, and now that's gone. All of this is to say that I'm tired. I just want to live in a house where I can be sure that my neighbor won't try to kill me, where I can feel confident that he's not going to try to break in. My boyfriend and I are trying to buy a house to move, but it's difficult. I'm a PhD student, and so I don't make very much money. Renting won't work. And because I have 4 cats, plus my partner's cat and dog, although we have a place secured for them if necessary, and finding a place to rent with so many animals is difficult, if not impossible. I refuse to rehome them, so maybe it's partially my fault that I'm stuck in this situation. My dad has agreed to co-sign on another mortgage, and I've gotten a second job. We should be able to save up enough money within a few months, but until then, I'm stuck. I just don't know what else to do. I'm tired, I'm hungry, so I figured that I would write this to vent. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. There are still so many different instances that I've left out. I'm just so exhausted. I'm a 22-year-old university student living with just my mate. I've lived with a lot of people before and I hated it. So 2 lads could be seen as the bachelor's life. I love staying up late, either gaming or just chatting to mates on Skype. My friend, however, is very predictable and goes to bed at 11, shower at 10:30 like clockwork. So I stayed up until 2 a.m. and I have the top floor. The last one to be murdered logic. This has 3 windows, one huge window that is slanted on the roof, that I always keep the blinds open. When I say it's huge, it is. I've often climbed through it to chill on my roof and to watch the stars. There's a lot of space for me. At 2 a.m. to 3 a.m., I climb in bed. Boxers only, and I watch YouTube videos until I drift off, facing away from the window. While watching one and listening to horror stories, I kept hearing a creaking. Assuming it was the video trying to get me in the psychological horror high, I ignored it. The video ended and I was about to choose another longer one, and the creaking came again. The walls are paper thin and I've had a house invasion before, so I was a little on edge. Calming myself down by switching sides, just in case anybody came to my door. It was also the same side as my window. The creaking continued, until it felt like it was in my room. My eyes could not believe what I saw. A dark figure slowly manifested at my window, first a head and then a body, consuming the entire window. I waited and tried to make it out, just staring at it thinking that it was only in my mind. But then a tapping came on the window glass. It was real. I jumped out of my bed, remembering that I kept a knife somewhere in my room. Where was it? I slammed on the lights to see a face looking back at me. "Shota, help!" I screamed. No movement. We stood there looking at each other. "Shota, get in here!" I yelled again. Stood there at my door, practically naked and wondering if I should run or stay where I was. I stayed and Shota never came. The man at my window said, "Hello, excuse me. Let me explain myself." I stood there speechless. "Can you please open the window so I can speak to you?" he pleads. I back in near the window. "What are you doing on my roof?" I exclaim. "Oh, I'm your neighbor, sorry," he apologizes. I take a second thought, but I open my window. "Sorry, I'm drunk and I'm trying to find my window. How are you?" "You scared the living crap out of me, man. So, do you know Lucien?" I was good friends with my neighbor and he just left for a different university and informed me that other people were moving in. I motioned to get my dressing on, realizing that I was naked. No," he replies as I was getting dressed. "Lucien from next door." He said there would be new people moving in. I questioned. "Oh, yes, Lucien, yeah, I know him," he replies. After talking to him and feeling calm, he said that he must try to find his window when he left. I watch as his black greasy hair and slightly trimmed beard with athletic figure goes to the left. I go downstairs to my housemate and yell at him for not coming up. He says that he didn't hear me run down, so there is no need for a panic. Having a laugh about it, I go to my neighbor's house in the morning to joke about it. Knocking on the door, a big, slightly fat man answers who I am now friends with. and I asked to see both and introduce myself as the new neighbor. One more person comes down with mousy brown hair, no beard, and is quite small. After meeting them, I later had a small gathering with friends, and when 2 a.m. came, I told them, time to get a little bit back on the neighbors. Climbing out of the window alone, I shuffled to the next window and mischievously knocked on it. I looked inside to see his horrified face, but there was nothing. The room was empty and no one lived there. The landlord told me that the previous tenants were squatters and were annoyed about being moved out for the refurb. That guy was not my neighbor. One summer night when I was around 5 years old, my sister and I awoke to hear something through our open bedroom window. My parents were yelling loudly on the back patio. This was not a common occurrence, and when they did fight, it was not typically anywhere that there is a chance of us hearing. But this sort of thing did happen from time to time, and though the situation was mildly unusual, we shrugged it off, shut the window, and went back to sleep. We promptly forgot about the ordeal. It wasn't until years later we learned the truth about the yelling. As a near adult, I overheard my mother explaining the situation to a family member in another room. I'm a little fuzzy in the details as this all occurred a long time ago, but this is the gist of it. Apparently, at some point in the night, after my sister and I went to bed, my parents received an unusual phone call from someone using an electronic interpreter. Basically the same type of technology a person who is deaf might use to make calls and communicate over the phone. Understandably, my parents were a little surprised because we didn't know anyone who would use this service to contact us. But either way, they had accepted the phone call. I'm not sure how the person on the other line introduced themselves, or if they even did at all, but they knew the full names of everyone in my family, which was immediately very creepy and alarming. The conversation began to escalate as the person on the other end of the phone very specifically explained what our house looked like and told my parents that they were hiding somewhere in our backyard, which was large, dark, and full of all kinds of plants and trees that made it hard to clearly see. There were too many places to look, and at this point, the tormentor made it clear that they had intentions of entering our home and dismembering my sister and I. At this point, understandably, they were beginning to become frantic. There was a chance that nobody was out there and that this was all just some kind of cruel joke, but that notion was not worth the risk of believing. My dad asked if they were really where they said they were, and what were my parents doing at that very moment, and what were they wearing and stuff like that. This infection of a human on the other end of the line explained exactly what my father was doing, which was waving his middle finger in the air. Exactly what they were wearing, where certain things on our patio were placed. The expression on my mom's face, every detail. My dad, a rough guy with a heart of gold, charged into the night, ready to kill any person he encountered. Neither of my parents had cell phones. I don't think they were even a thing at this time. So my mom took the phone, which had finally been put down by my dad, and called the police. As brave and stupid as my dad was for venturing into the dark that night, he found nothing, and when the cops showed up soon after, they found nothing too. The police were not able to trace the call because of the electronic interpreter, which they said was a common device used by people trying to anonymously harass others over the phone. Nothing ever came of this incident, and as I said, I was not told about it until at least a decade after it had happened. Was this the work of a former friend or enemy trying to play some kind of cruel joke? Was there an actual threat in my backyard? We will never know. This happened this past May. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. The complex has no security guards whatsoever with one other roommate. We'll call the roommate Emily. It's also important to know that a lot of people will ask Emily if we're twins. We look very similar. She and I both spend almost every night at our boyfriend's house and are rarely home. One night around 8:45 p.m., I was home cleaning before I left to go to my boyfriend's house. I ran to get something from my car and came back into my apartment, locking the door behind me. 5 minutes after, I hear a knock at my door. I'm already a paranoid person, so I get a little scared. I knew that it wasn't Emily because she would have called to tell me she forgot her key. I tried to ignore it and then a second knock. These also weren't innocent knocks. They sounded like a police officer knock. Immediately after the second knock, I FaceTime my boyfriend. He's convincing me to take a look through the peephole. I take a look and no one is there. I say, okay, I'm going to pack my stuff and then come over. I take 2 steps back from the peephole and then again, I hear banging on the door. Even my boyfriend's face dropped on the phone. I ran and locked myself in the bathroom crying. I didn't get out of there until my boyfriend got there to get me. And when he did, no one was at my door. The next day, my boyfriend and I stopped at my apartment so I could change and get ready for a Cinco de Mayo gathering. There were no knocks that day. The day after I got home, Emily was out getting kitty litter and was going to meet me at the apartment since we were both too scared to be there alone. I get home and I was sitting on my phone scrolling through TikTok. About 10 minutes into the scrolling, I hear that same knock. I look through my peephole and call Emily and describe to her what the guy looked like. She had no idea who it could be. I then watched him walk away and thought maybe that he would stop. Another 5 minutes passed and he was back knocking. I FaceTime Emily again and she tells me to open the door. Don't ever do this. I opened the door and the guy was a bit muscular, looked a little bit older than me, I'm 23, and was someone who I had never seen around my apartment complex before. He seemed shook that I answered. The conversation was, "Oh, is this a bad time?" "Yes." "I was just wondering, do you have a printer?" "No." "Oh, okay." And then he walked away slowly. I also thought it was weird that someone was asking for a printer being that all classes were moved to online format, and we were supposed to be in quarantine. And also, if you needed a printer that bad and someone doesn't answer the first knock, why would you keep trying? Especially when you don't even know the person. We told a bunch of people about the knocking in our complex and one other apartment said that they had been having the same issues. They were also 2 girls living alone. The next day came and Emily went back with her boyfriend. As she was leaving the apartment, she heard from a balcony next to ours. "Yo, is that her?" She turned around and 2 men ran back inside. We told the apartment complex and called the police. They said they can't really do anything unless the guy is present at our door knocking. After that, we installed a motion detection camera and put up a sign on our window. "We have cameras and you're being recorded." Since then, Emily has moved out. I have 2 new male roommates who are seen coming in and out of the apartment, and no one has came and knocked since. This story happened when I was 15 and totally reckless. I was with my best friend Alice and her neighbor Emily. We decided to try and enter clubs with our fake IDs after discreetly going out of the house by the window. After getting rejected by the security guards at the clubs because obviously we were not looking like 18+ girls, we were wandering the streets not knowing what to do. It was around 1 a.m. and the subway was closed, and we didn't have enough money to get a cab. Plus, we really wanted to party. And Alice wanted to find a new guy because she was heartbroken from her past boyfriend. The last club we tried to enter into was in one of the areas that had a famous bad reputation in the city. It was in Lyon, France. Suddenly, a car stops next to us. The door opens and there are 3 guys inside. 2 of them turn their head and tell us, "Hey, pretty girls, come with us. We have everything you need to get some pleasure. We have some drinks and we can smoke, come." The one at the back looked really muscular and was really insistent. Alice then said, "Let's go, girls, it could be super fun." Then she whispered, "Please, I need some fun, I need a guy to turn the page." She grabbed Emily's arm and went into the car laughing. At this point, I was like, what the heck am I doing? Well, I would rather die with my friends than die alone in the streets, and we all enter the car. In the car, they're trying to flirt with us, but I'm petrified. We say that we're 17 and they tell us that it's the perfect age to party with them. After 15 minutes of them driving to I don't know where, around the city, they say that they want to get some drinks, and that they want to find a cool place. Alice is super happy. Emily and I are relieved that they're going to drop us in a public place like a bar or a club, but they park the car in a car park in the middle of nowhere. They get out of the car and the guys take some bottles from the trunk, mix a lot of stuff inside the glasses, and then give them to us. The one who was driving stays in the car, hands on the wheel, not saying anything. The 2 other guys start to tell us really inappropriate things, and that they're going to take us to a hotel and that we all looked like we had experience. They were around 35 and we were all 15. They insisted on saying how they would be the best hit of our lives, how they would be in beds, etc. Emily whispers to me that we shouldn't drink, but act as if we're all drinking because there might be something inside of it. Alice starts flirting back and tells them that it's kind of dangerous, but she likes it. At this point, they tell that they're never going to let us go unless we stay with them the whole night. I feel trapped and they ask me to drink insistently. I finally do it and I start to feel dizzy really fast. Everything is blurry around me. I think in a very incoherent way and my stomach hurts. The guys are looking at me as if I was a prey and they were hunting. About 10 to 15 minutes of feeling like this, I tell Alice that we should go and she doesn't look worried at all. I then think that I should sit inside the car, waiting for my fate to do its job. I open the front door and there's still the guy who drove inside. He is listening to the radio and doesn't even look at me when I enter. I asked him, "Why aren't you with your friends?" He turns to me upset and says, "Hey, I don't know who you are and I don't want to know. You told us you were 17, but you look like my younger sister and she just got into high school. I don't know why my stupid friends are stupidly flirting with you, but I'm just waiting for them to stop and drop the 3 of you in a public place. Once it'll be done, I hope I'll never have to see you again in my entire life." I was shocked and relieved. We stayed there, the both of us, just listening to the radio, and hearing the laughs of Alice to the bad sexual jokes of the muscular guy. I was so dizzy, I was melting into my seat. After maybe 30 minutes, the driver said he wanted to go somewhere, and everybody got into the car. We sat in there and went for about a 10-minute ride, while the 2 guys were saying what they would do to us once we got to the hotel. The driving guy told them to shut up, and that he was dropping us off in a big place with lots of people. We gave the 2 guys some fake names for Facebook, some fake phone numbers, and we finally got out of the car. The muscular guy who was in the back tried to grab Emily's arm, but she managed to run outside and get away. They left. The driver looked at me just before and he nodded at me. I was still super dizzy and eventually I threw everything up that I had consumed. Emily didn't believe what had just happened, and Alice was still laughing, saying that was insane. It was like 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and we finally found a real party after that. But to these two guys that wanted to do I don't know what in a hotel, I'm glad that night didn't continue. Or, like the driving guy said, I hope I'll never ever see you again in my entire life.